Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is about Palestine and Ireland, which somebody has requested, comparing and contrasting the situation in two countries, if indeed they are countries, as is disputed by some in both cases. So Palestine is a nation by almost any definition. It is recognized as a sovereign state by dozens of others. It has embassies in many other countries. Although I'm not aware of other countries having embassies in Palestine. The Palestinians claim Jerusalem as their capital. The Israelis also claim Jerusalem as their capital. And the Israelis have therefore prevented anyone setting up a diplomatic mission to Palestine in the same city. Palestinians prefer to call Israel Al-Quds al-Arabi, even when speaking in English, even though the English language name of the city is Jerusalem. As an Anglophone, you'd have to be reasonably well versed in the Middle East to even have heard of the Arabic language name for that city. Most Palestinians, well, they want freedom for their country. It's clearly not free when most of it's been under illegal Israeli occupation for 53 years, when many thousands of their civilians have been deliberately killed by the Israeli armed forces. And a lot of property has been stolen, and I use that word advisedly. I really mean stolen in an absolutely literal sense, houses and farms. And it's true that Palestinians have fought back, and some of them have deliberately killed Israeli civilians, which is murder just as much as it's murder when it happens the other way. And Jewish people have been treated appallingly for centuries in Christendom and in Muslim lands too. And many Jews were driven out of Muslim lands after 1948, which is of course reprehensible, just as despicable as when Palestinians were driven out of mandatory Palestine, which has become the state of Israel. So the Palestinians have lost most of their country in the 20th century. Well, almost all of it now is either directly or indirectly under Israeli control. The Gaza Strip, one of the most overpopulated areas in the world, is nominally under Palestinian rule, but it's not effectively autonomous, since the Israelis control access to and egress from the Gaza Strip, as well as the airspace above it, as well as its maritime border. So they're hemmed in. It's almost like an open-air prison. So I don't accuse the Israelis of trying to perpetuate genocide against the Palestinians. No, that's not true. Mustn't be too harsh. The Palestinians are rather different from the Israelis. Obviously, Palestinians speak Arabic. Israelis have Hebrew as their official language. There are plenty of Israeli citizens who actually can't speak it, but only speak Russian or even English. Palestinians are mostly Muslims, a few Christians, and even a handful of Jews. Palestine even had a Ministry of Jewish Affairs staffed by Jewish people as recently as the 90s. So ethnicity is difficult to say, but arguably they're a difficult ethnicity. And Israelis, obviously they often trace their ancestry back to that area, to Palestine or Judea, as you might have called it in ancient times, or indeed Israel, as was called in the time of King David. But in many cases, it's a dubious lineage. They can't prove declension from the ancient Israelites. Many of them are probably Khazars, descendants of the people who lived around the shore of the Caspian Sea in late antiquity or the Dark Ages, because Khazar in local languages is the name of the Caspian. Palestine was obviously part of various empires, which is not to say it shouldn't be independent now. No nation has always been independent. And people talk about artificial nations. All nations are artificial. Or remember, who was it? Newt Gingrich saying the Palestinians were invented people. All peoples are invented. We're all related to each other some along the line. We all come from the Rift Valley in Africa. So we're all each other's sisters and brothers. So a nation's got to start sometime, just as it's got to stop sometime. And there's no hard and fast rules when one nation ends and another begins. I forget what the name of this logical fallacy is. It's difficult to say when the difference between red and pink is. We can't say exactly this is red, this is pink, that's a dividing line, which doesn't mean that red and pink don't exist. Obviously, there was the first catastrophe for the Palestinians in the 20th century, 1917, I suppose, when with the Balfour Declaration, the British conquest. So they had dominion over Palestine. Then the League of Nations mandate permitting the United Kingdom to administer Palestine, and indeed to lead them towards independence. The Balfour Declaration saying that George V's government would view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a homeland for the Jews, but without prejudice to the rights of existing communities, as say the Arab community, who were about 90% of the populace there at the time. But it didn't actually say that this Jewish homeland would be independent. Was it to be a colony of the United Kingdom? Was it to be a dominion of the British Empire, the same status as, say, Canada or Australia, possibly? It was deliberately ambiguous on this. And people say there was the Hussein McMahon correspondence, this Irish diplomat, obviously the service of the UK, since we were British at the time, him writing to the king of the Hashemites, ruling the Hejaz, in what's now Saudi Arabia, and it seemed to have also promised Palestine to a greater Arab state. But and then lots of Jewish immigration coming to Palestine in the 1920s and 30s, really speeding up with National Socialist persecution of the Jews in Germany. Perhaps that's too much of a backstory, but was Palestinians say al-Nakba, the calamity, and came in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel, or perhaps a re-establishment of Israel as a polity, as a Zionist would like to point out. So Palestinians have suffered severe discrimination ever since then, and their cars have special number plates and so on. So I'm not suggesting any faith or any ethnicity is bad, only actions are bad or individuals are bad, and no one should be mistreated on the grounds of religion or race. That includes Jews, of course, as it includes Palestinians. So obviously there's much to lambast in many Ishmaelite and Mohammedan states. They should be excoriated. Some of them, like Saudi Arabia, have amongst the most abysmal human rights records on the planet. Now, it's true that Israel is much better than many of the adjacent nation states, but that doesn't obviously excuse them entirely. And I do give the Israelis credit when it's due, at least not having the death penalty, at least being honest about using torture, not having child soldiers, for example, things like that. Sometimes a knock on the roof, some efforts to reduce civilian deaths. So Northern Ireland, well, is part of the United Kingdom because the majority of people have chosen that many, many times. And the Republic of Ireland, where I'm from, has recognised the legitimacy of Northern Ireland's position as an integral part of the United Kingdom many times. There was a Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and there was a referendum on that a couple of months later, in which the whole of Ireland, Republic of Ireland and the North, voted on the same day in a referendum to recognise Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, and by about an 85% majority, the people of the whole of Ireland recognised that. Now, most people in Ireland are nationalists, or some people call themselves post-nationalists. What's a nationalist? Would like an autonomous Irish state. I shan't say independent because most of them are Europhiles, and that Irish state would comprise most of Ireland, or ideally all of Ireland. And so most people, most nationalists, they would aspire for Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom and to fuse with the Republic of Ireland. But there doesn't seem to be any immediate prospect of that transpiring. Israel gets away with flying in the face of the will of the United Nations General Assembly. Israel is in breach of more UN General Assembly resolutions than any other state in history. But how did they get away with this? Because the United States has a seat as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and therefore able to veto any UN Security Council resolution against Israel. The United States has used its veto in favor of Israel more times than the United States has used that veto in favor of itself, which is really just staggering. So does Israel have a right to exist secure behind its own borders? It certainly does, just the same as Palestine does. Now, who is really insecure? Who is occupying whom? It's Palestine has been under illegal enemy occupation for 53 years, not Israel. It's Palestine's land that's been taken away so many times. It's Palestinian civilians who've been killed in huge numbers, far, far more than Israelis have been killed. And I don't want Israeli civilians to be killed either. I don't want anyone to be killed. And if there is to be a fight, and I'm not a pacifist, people should only kill soldiers. Anyway, but it's really staggering and smacks of jaw-dropping ignorance that quite a few Americans would oppose democracy for Palestine, as well as opposing it for Northern Ireland, would support the illegal occupation of Palestine, but at the same time they would oppose Northern Ireland's lawful membership of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, which is really America's strongest ally, which has fought beside the United States in many conflicts abroad, which plays host to quite a few American military bases, has done since 1942. So the UK, which does so much for the United States, the UK does so much and gets nothing. Israel does nothing for the United States and gets everything, being subsidized to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars every year, getting weapons for free as well as just as a subvention, getting intelligence cooperation, diplomatic cover, and on and on and on. And nary a politician in the United States will dare to breathe a word of mildest and most recent criticism of the Zionist state, because that would have a terminal effect on anyone's political career. So we talk about nationalists in Ireland. Some people now say they're post-nationalist, or really they're Euro-nationalist. I don't care so much about the tricolour or the Union flag. That's the British flag. All part of the European Union. It doesn't really matter, and they falsely say that helped bring an end to the Northern Ireland conflict. But there's Sinn Féin, which in the north of Ireland is the main nationalist party. It's actually the largest single party in the Republic of Ireland, even though it only gets about 25% of the vote, and is very pro-Palestine. Now, I disagree with Sinn Féin on many things, but in this one, I'm on the money. I think they're on the money. I see eye to eye with them. This one, Palestine should be allowed to be independent. The illegal occupation ought to be terminated forthwith, and Jerusalem's got to be shared. You can't have it only for the Israelis. And they say, oh, it's mentioned in the Bible many times, it's not mentioned in the Quran. Well, that's true, which doesn't mean it's not the capital of Palestine. Palestinians wish to have another capital, that's up to them. And I know some Zionists will say, oh, there are no Palestinians, because but like saying the Israelis, there are no Israelis, they are French or Russian or American, because their ancestors came from other countries in recent decades. Well, that's true, even though some of them have a rather tenuous link to the Levant 2 millennia ago. Or people saying, well, they're not unique, the Palestinians, they speak Arabic. That's true, which is like saying because the Americans speak English, there's no such thing as Americans. It's a completely specious argument. It doesn't withstand a moment's scrutiny. So it's facile to say that a language is a nation or a nation is a language. It's not the case. Language makes a nationality. A nationality does not always make a language either. And then there are people in Northern Ireland who are Unionists. They call that because they wish to preserve the active union, Northern Ireland's union with Great Britain, keeping Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom. And some of them identify with Israel. I mean, I'm a Unionist, even though I'm actually from the Republic of Ireland. I seek the dissolution of the Republic of Ireland and our reintegration with the United Kingdom. But anyway, that's likely to be a forlorn hope, certainly more than a trifle quixotic. And for 20 years, in some loyalist areas of Belfast, people have displayed the Israeli colours. A loyalist is a particularly hard-line unionist. There's also a denominational divide in Northern Ireland between Catholics and Protestants, whereas nationalists tended to be Catholic, unionists tended to be Protestant. You don't have to be. I mean, I'm from a Catholic background, but I favour the union. And there were two Jewish Lord Mayors of Belfast in the 19th century. One of them was Wolf with a double O, is a Jewish German, as in owned the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff. Anyway, so Ruth Dudley Edwards is an Irish unionist from Dublin, a Catholic too, and she is very much Zionist. So some people in Ireland organised a boycott of certain Israeli goods, especially things which are grown in the illegal occupied territories and these stolen farms and so on. And I call for the restitution of property from Jews who were driven out of Iraq, Iran, Morocco, Syria, wherever else it may be. Over the last few decades, reparatory payments should be made to those who suffered. People who are driven out of Egypt, there ought to be the restoration of citizenship for those who want it, to both Palestinians and Jews who suffered in this terrible time. Now, I'm not against Israel's existence, and I think the Balfour Declaration shouldn't have been made. After the Second World War, it was almost impossible not to create Israel. 1/3 of all the Jews in the world wiped out in the space of just 3 years. One of the largest ethno-religious groups in the world, not to have a country to call its own. The idea they thought they were safe in Germany, where they'd lived for centuries, where in some case they're very assimilated. They were German to their bones, so they felt, lived and breathed German culture, achieved preferment positions of affluence and influence. Germany, so civilized, a country which had 99% literacy before almost anywhere else, so technologically and scientifically advanced, the birthplace of so many magnificent composers and renowned philosophers, and even there, such barbarity could happen, and that the situation for the Jewish minority could decline very fast indeed. If Jews weren't safe in Deutschland, they weren't safe anywhere, and so they were compelled for mere self-preservation to create their own homeland. And if other people had to be driven out at gunpoint, then so be it. And I've heard this argument from Zionists that there are many Arab and Muslim countries that have got other places to go. Or people saying the Palestinians, they're really Egyptian or Jordanian. If they want to be Egyptian or Jordanian, if the Egyptians or the Jordanians wish to accept them, that's up to them. But so far as I know, they don't. And it's true that a lot of Palestinians shifted to Jordan, and Jordan granted citizenship to them as well. There's such a thing as dual citizenship, right? Doesn't mean you're not the other one. There are Israeli Americans, right? Doesn't mean you're not one. You're not the other. You're both. Or they're Russian Israelis, or they're let's say British Pakistanis, or they're, I don't know, other dual citizenships in the world, or they're Irish Romanians and so on. You can be two. You can be three. You can even be more. So that's preposterous, especially coming from a country which has so many dual citizens. So that's my penny's worth about Northern Ireland and Palestine. I don't think the two situations are particularly comparable. Northern Ireland's part of the UK because most people in Northern Ireland have always wanted that for centuries. And it's one of the most humane, democratic, and affluent societies in the world. It's very prosperous. It's got a superb human rights record. The conflict's been over for a long time. There's been no death associated with the conflict for, goodness, quite a few years now. 5 years, more? Sometimes this terrorist organization called the Real IRA murders people they accuse of being drug dealers, and that's about it. The Real IRA, supposedly defenders of the Catholic community, has only ever killed Catholics for about 10 years. And there's some murder rate in every country, but Northern Ireland's got almost 2 million people, and maybe one person might get killed every other year or something like that. So very, very low indeed. The British Army hasn't killed a single person in Northern Ireland since, I think, 1994. The police in Northern Ireland hasn't killed a single person since even before that. So it's a superb situation. The police service in Northern Ireland, its predecessor, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, these are names illumined in incandescent resplendence for their gallantry, their professionalism, and their victory over the forces of darkness, over loyalist and Republican terrorism. The same goes for the British Army. Obviously, the members of the security forces who disgraced their uniform sometimes by committing vile crimes. So I would like to see Palestine independent. I'd like to see it as a free society. And it's sad to say that many Arab and Muslim countries, even if they're completely independent, are not free, are run by oppressive governments. So the same might pertain in Palestine. But however bad the Palestinian administration, and the Palestinians have often been cursed with dreadful, unworthy leaders, that they don't want to be ruled by Israel. And Israel's not doing it out of generosity towards them or with their interests at heart. Absolutely not. So Israel's obviously based on a religion and an ethnicity, and there are Arab Israelis as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit about Israel and Northern Ireland. Toodaloo.